I'd like to share some personal foibles with you. I've heard that even the most logical people are not always completely rational. And so this is a confession of one of my own eccentricities. For most of my life, I've usually had a motorcycle, starting with some dirt bikes when I was too young to ride anything else. And yes, I used them illegally as street transportation all over town until I was old enough to get a license to ride street bikes. I've since had Kawasaki, Suzuki, Yamaha, Honda, even Harley. But they were never good bikes. They were usually rat bikes, painted with Krylon and held together with duct tape. My favorite of all of them was a 1971 Yamaha flat track racer that was modeled after the 650 Triumph Bonneville. Someone had that sitting in their garage for 20 years and gave it to me when I helped him move. I took it into the metal shop at the local community college and chopped part of the frame. I put strips of angle iron up the backside to move the shocks up and back, which lowered the body so much that I had to saw off the back stand because it only had 2 fingers of clearance. And the cylinders used to lean forward a bit, but after I leaned it back, then they were straight up, just like on the old Triumph Bonnevilles. That mod also kicked out the rake so that it looked like a chopper, which it literally was because I chopped it. Now that was back in the days when you could go into a motorcycle junkyard and take bits and pieces off of this or that. So I put on buckhorn bars and a fatter back tire from a Virago, I think, and I put on highway pegs from a Triumph Bonneville, the gas tank from a Harley Sportster, and the king and queen seat that I took from a Harley Wide Glide. The seat back was supported by a sissy bar that I hacksawed off of one of those old banana seat Schwinn bicycles from the 1970s and then welded it onto the frame. The turn signals were bullet lamps that I got at an auto parts store. I also took off the old Musket mufflers and replaced them with Volkswagen Beetle mufflers that were exactly the same diameter, so that it would look like it had straight pipes once I fixed them in place with plumber's pipe fitting and JB weld. When it ran, it sounded exactly like an old Beetle. Again, the original mufflers were angled upward, but when I leaned the bike back, the new mufflers were parallel with the street, just the way I wanted it to look. I called it Frankenbike because it was made out of so many different things. And as horrible as all of that sounds, it actually looked pretty good for what it was. And it was fun to ride, though I had to be attentive because it would occasionally catch fire for reasons that we were never able to pinpoint. Sad that I don't think I have any pictures of that bike because that was back when cameras needed film and you had to pay someone to develop low-res images that would eventually be damaged in floods or fires or somehow lost the next time you moved to a new slum or trailer park. When I had Frankenbike, I was in my early 30s doing tattoos and living with strippers and building a Harley chopper in my dining room. You know, the stereotypical biker lifestyle. But the last tattoo I did professionally was used by the police to identify the body of a drug dealer who was murdered by other clients of mine. And this was right when I became a single parent again. So I thought, you know, a family court judge just might look at my situation negatively. Thus, I decided I needed a more acceptable career, and that's when I got into computer tech support and sold both of my bikes. A couple of years later, I wanted to ride again, and some crackhead sold me an old VT750 Shadow for $500. Now, those were celebrated for their reliability, but this one broke down 13 times in 1 year. I wanted to replace that bike, and I was going to try to get a Harley, a good one this time. But I've always been poor. I never had good credit. At that time, I was steadily employed full-time with overtime, which is the reason I moved to Dallas. I lived in a dozen or so prettier towns, but where there were no jobs to be had, where unemployment was high, and folks had to donate plasma to buy cigarettes. But Dallas was the one place where I always had a job doing something somewhere. At that time, I was a single parent, buried in bills, so trying to raise a family on my own. So financing a Harley was not going to happen. But then, at that time, a friend of mine fell into a serious health issue, and he had to give up his bike. So he gave me a deal. No credit check. Just pay me $250 a month and it's yours. Done. His bike was not a Harley. It was a Victory Vegas, made by Polaris. It had a 1500cc V-twin, which was at the time was the biggest motorcycle engine in the world. It was a $10,000 bike, but I only paid $250 a month, which was still a challenge for me, but I had to have it. As soon as I got it, I took the windshield off and I put on 10.5-inch baby apes. Those are the handlebars that come up higher, and I put on 4-inch forward foot controls. So now I can be in the same position as I would be driving in a car with the seat pushed back. Perfectly comfortable for long hauls. It also had chrome skulls on the side with eyes that light up red. And it did not take long for me to fall in love with that bike. Suddenly I had a nice bike for the first time in my life. I took it on a bunch of road trips down to Austin or into New Mexico or out to the Grand Canyon. I rode it to a convention in Memphis where I was cruising at 100 miles an hour most of the way there. It just never quit. And the surprising thing is, it never broke down. Ever. If there was ever a problem with it, it was something I did to it. Now, there was a problem with the brake line at the forward foot controls that I put on. I had to fix that. And the higher handlebars caused an issue with the clutch cable until I figured that out and bought a longer one. And I went through consumable items like batteries every few years, and drive belt every 30,000 miles or so, tires every year. But there was never anything wrong with that motor. Mechanics back then described it as bulletproof. And there was this one weird thing that this bike would do that was not like any other bike I ever had. Every single time I pushed the starter button, it would start. Every time. It was the most reliable motorcycle in the Western world with the highest customer satisfaction of any bike to that time. I featured it in a few of my videos as I've been riding that one motorcycle for 20 years. Then came the tornado. A tree came over the top of my Jeep, which has a roll cage, so that didn't matter, but the tree continued on and toppled my bike, causing damage that wasn't immediately detectable, but that led to a chronic condition where it ran worse every time I rode it. Where you open the gas tank to put the fuel in, there was a crack inside that you can't see unless you get your head down there and look in from the opposite direction, which of course I never do, so I didn't know about it. But if it rains on the bike, which it didn't happen often, but if it does, sometimes I'd get caught in the rain. But when water hits that, it would get into the gas tank. So it's now running through the engine. And now the bike is backfiring and sputtering where it was always smooth, perfect power before. And now my problem was that Polaris doesn't make Victory anymore. Instead, they revived the Indian motorcycles. Stupid name, I know, but they're beautiful. And when I was a kid, I saw the 46 Indian Chief, and I wanted one ever since. The Indian Chief Vintage, which came out in 2014 and ran until I think 2021, is the only other bike that I've ever looked at with lust in my heart since getting my Vegas. Because my best friend in high school used to restore vintage Chevys from the 50s and 60s, so I came to appreciate that style. Wide white wall tires and all of that. And Polaris made a business decision. They built their reputation by building the Victories, and the Vegas was their flagship, and it was such a good bike. People loved it so much that, hey, we can make motorcycles. So they started making Indians, and the Indians are based on the reputation of the Victory Vegas, and the reports are that they are just as reliable as the old Victories were. Now, a decade ago, my wife said that I should trade my Vic in on an Indian, but I wouldn't cheat on my Victory. I admit I'm a bit eccentric about that, in that I want to show respect to an object in exchange for it having served me so well for so long. Admirably. So I stuck with it. I know it's irrational, indefensibly so, but that's just how I am. After the tornado, my Vegas needs help, and I don't yet know what's wrong with it. I don't know where to go. Victory dealers don't exist anymore, and even though Indians are made by Polaris, the same parent company, the Indian dealer near me will not work on Victories. So I turned to Old School Choppers, one of the last independent motorcycle shops in this area. He found rust in the gas tank, and he worried that the interior might be much worse. But I still want to save it. Not because that's a sound decision, but because I want to be fair to the bike. I don't want it to go out like this. So I asked him to look into it more deeply and see what can be done. He called me a few days later and to report bad news. He tore into the motor and found significant interior damage, with some parts either cracked or otherwise worn out. He said it would be cheaper to buy a rebuilt engine, but that it would still cost several $1,000s, more than it would cost to replace the whole thing with a used one. So I have to give up the nicest and best ride I ever had. One that never failed me, ever. That's heartbreaking. I thought that would be my last bike, that I would ride that till I die. So hearing that I'll never ride it again felt a bit like putting a beloved dog down, especially since I couldn't imagine upgrading from what I have. I mean, I believe in appreciating what you have while you have it. So I don't want to pine over something lost. And there's no point in replacing it with something that isn't as good. But I can't afford anything that good. So I thought I might never have another motorcycle. 10 years ago, when I took my son into the Indian dealership to look at the Chiefs, he fell in love with the Scout. And he finally bought one just a few months ago. How can I not go riding with my son? It's not a practical decision, but I'm not ready to give up and just never ride again. And then my wife reminded me about the Indians that I was looking at, back when the vintage Chief came out. She showed me some ones from back then that I might be able to afford now that they're a decade old, if I can finance it. And that is how and why I got this 2014 Indian Chief Vintage. The one I wanted had a classic fender with the bumper, and it had a much cheaper price tag, but they said they couldn't sell me that one because of some unresolved electrical problem. So they gave me another one, a better one, that cost 50% more, but they gave it to me at the price of the one that I wanted, which was like 1/3 off. Can't argue with that. Now this one is heavily customized with high weight pegs and ape hangers. I need those. And louder exhaust. It has a stage 3 big bore kit, taking the motor from 111 to 116 cubic inches. This is a 1900cc motorcycle. There are a lot of cars that don't have engines that big. But it sounds great, and it looks great, and it feels awesome roaring down the open highway. And the price is right, barely attainable for someone like me. I don't know if it's as good as my old Vegas was, but it feels like it might be. Even better. So now I think this is the bike I'll ride for the rest of my life, faithfully, till death do us part.